This is your PowerPoint for the PowerPoint quiz on European imperialism. Imperialism was a form of international relations in which Europeans took direct or indirect control of third world countries. They did this for three purposes. First, to gain raw resources for industries in the mother country. Second, to compete with other nation-states. And third, to spread what they believed was a superior modern European culture. Modernism versus traditionalism. Europeans believed that they had evolved to a new phase in human culture. They believed that traditional societies were still dependent on the biological order. Traditional societies were seen as tribal, superstitious, animist, agricultural, and authoritarian, whereas modernist societies in Europe were seen as rational, scientific, capitalist, and democratic. Social Darwinism. Charles Darwin had written The Origin of Species in 1853. In that book, he argued that natural evolution was based upon species evolving in order to deal with natural selection, competition, mutation, and adaptation to their environment. Social Darwinists argued that certain races of human beings had adapted better, and therefore their descendants had biological superiority. Social Darwinism was mixed with Christianity and then formed a sense of what could be called Christian paternalism. This was best expressed by Rudyard Kipling's famous poem, The White Man's Burden, because it really is so hard to be a white guy. Technological opportunities. Europeans had been able to colonize areas in North and South America. However, Africa and Asia remained independent due to strong governments, large populations, and diverse geographies. The Europeans began developing in the late 1800s new technologies that allowed them to conquer these regions. For example, steam allowed for ships and railroads to break through mountain ranges and large bodies of water. Steel allowed for superior European navies. Automatic weapons, like the Gatling gun, allowed for massive killing of populations in short periods of time. And new medicines like quinine protected Europeans from diseases like malaria in Africa. The scramble for Africa. At the Berlin Conference, the Europeans met together under Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, in order to make clear rules for conquering Africa in order to avoid a world war. Britain took areas in the Nile and eastern Africa. Germany claimed lands in western and southwestern Africa. France took Senegal, Sahara, and Madagascar, and Belgium took Congo. South Africa. The Dutch initially had settled there. The conflict ensued between the Dutch and the local Zulu tribes. Then Britain discovered gold. The British Army fought with the Dutch settlers in the Boer Wars for control. Eventual peace was granted as long as the British gained access to gold and the Dutch were allowed to create apartheid with the Zulu tribes. Types of rule. One type of rule was known as direct rule. The French did this. They tended to use areas like Rhodesia and Zambezi. They appointed a military governor to run the local colony directly. They would attempt to assimilate the people into the French culture. A second form of control was indirect control. The British tended to do this. They would appoint a British viceroy to run the colony. However, day-to-day activities were run by appointed natives from the middle class. This created a division between the natives, with the middle class owing its livelihood to the European mother country. This ensured an alliance with the local natives against the poor. India and imperialism. The British East India Company had initially conquered and subdued India. This was not the British government, it was a private British company. They replaced the Mughal Empire as it was ripped apart by conflicts between Hindus and Muslims. The British government then had a viceroy who ran India formally, but they appointed members of the middle class to a local government. The British developed roads, hospitals, and schools for Indians. They also put an official end to sati and child marriages. Indian Imperialism Part 2. Britain's textile industries beat out local Indian cottage labor. Britain gave favor to imports from England. England stopped trying to include Indians in any type of parliamentary decisions by 1898. The British soldiers saw local Indian customs as inferior and barbaric. The British established a local zamindar governor who collected burdensome taxes from the local peasants. Japan and European imperialism. The Tokugawa dynasty had tried to unite Japan under one emperor. However, the daimyos in the local provinces had remained largely in control, and this remained the same all the way up until 1852, when the United States sent out Commodore Perry, who came to the capital of Edo and demanded that the Japanese open to international trade. Japan went through an internal debate on this, on how to deal with foreign competition between the daimyo and the samurai. Japan and European Imperialism Part 2. A civil war ensued between the Sat and Choi. A reform group named the Meiji came to power in 1868. They advocated for Western education, a creation of a diet or parliament, and a tax on agricultural lands in order to provide incentives for people to move to cities. Investments were made by the government in order to create industry. The big fear was how to maintain Japanese identity while at the same time moving over into more of a European technology. The Meiji Restoration. Japan industrialized in less than 50 years. They created a massive steel navy, and then they went out and began expanding. They defeated the Chinese in the Sino-Japanese War of 1895. They then defeated the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War in 1906. Japan rose to a dominant power or hegemon in the Asian sphere of influence. Latin America and the United States. In 1820, the U.S. President James Monroe established the Monroe Doctrine. This stated that the U.S. was the leader of the Western Hemisphere. This then led to Manifest Destiny, in which the United States claimed that it had a mandate from God to eventually conquer the hemisphere in order to civilize it. The U.S. was only able to conquer North America. The Spanish-American War. By 1896, the Cubans had fought with José Martí as their leader in order to gain independence from Spain. They used the Americans' Declaration of Independence as their model. America joined in their fight, claiming that they had sympathies with the Cubans' desire for independence. But then the Americans turned around and formed the Platt Amendment. At the end of the war, America claimed the right to intervene in Cuban affairs during any emergency. The Open Door Policy. Americans also helped the Philippines to gain their independence from Spain. The Philippines was important for the desire to open up China to international trade. The leader of the Filipino liberation movement was Emilio Aguinaldo, who asked for help from the U.S. to gain liberation. But the President of the United States, James McKinley, then claimed that a vision from God had ordered him to colonize the Philippines. The Filipinos fought a guerrilla war against the U.S. for 4 years, and 200,000 Filipinos died in that war. The Open Door Part 2. At the end of the war, the Secretary of State John Hay of the United States negotiated an open door with the Chinese. This created trade zones in China so that Europeans and the U.S. could trade with regions of China. This prevented a global war for dominance in China. Also, it opened up China to international trade. Changes in China. Trade in China, though, was based on a single cash crop economy. Large landowners began buying up major areas of land, causing massive loss of land for poor farmers. Massive emigration ensued into the cities. The problem for China was how to support these concentrations